Welcome to episode 3 of Arctic 360's Breaking the Ice. My name is Ayoe.
And my name is Connor, and we are your co-hosts.
This week we're talking about mining. This is a sector that is crucial to the economies of both Northern Canada and of Greenland. However, there are many ways to encourage more collaboration between the two locations. Moreover, there's a lot each industry can teach the other.
We had two great guests join us on the show today. From Greenland, we are fortunate enough to have Hans Hinrichsen, who is the general manager of the Greenland School of Minerals and Petroleum. His school takes an innovative approach to mining, focusing on hands-on learning and practical experience in the industry.
And we also spoke to Paul Gruner, the president and CEO of Det'on Cho Management LP. His corporation serves the Yellowknives Dene First Nation and manages 15 companies serving the research industry, including the Ayoe Diamond Mine and the Beer Snap Lake Mine.
In our conversation, we discuss lessons Canada can learn from the Greenland Mining School, environmental sustainability, incorporating Indigenous interest into the mining industry, and more. Now let's get to it. So to get started, thank you both for being here today on Breaking the Ice. And perhaps just to get started, we could get both of you in just a few sentences to explain to our audience your personal professional background, just so they have an idea.
Sure. Yeah. No. So Paul Gruner with Det'on Cho Management LP. I've got a number of years sort of in the resource sector, both oil and gas, and now mining. Come from both an operation and management background, and spent the last sort of 20 plus years in the north. So I've worked across northern British Columbia and Alberta in northern Canada, Yukon, Alaska, and now Northwest Territories. In the last 8 years or so, I've been directly within the Indigenous business space, working with local First Nations groups as they build out their businesses and develop their communities.
Thank you. And Hans?
Yeah, well, my background is that I am actually Danish. But I moved to Greenland in 1990 and started out as a teacher. Then when the school here started, I was appointed the first manager. That was in 2008. I became general manager in 2011 and, still working on getting things done here.
Great. My next question is for Paul. But can you tell us a little bit about the Chancho Management and how your organization is involved in the mining industry?
Well, certainly. Yeah, so Det'on Cho has been around for over 30 years, and it actually stands for Big Eagle in the Dene language. So there is a meaning to it. And so it started with a very modest $15,000 grant 32 years ago now. And over that period of time, we've grown to be one of the largest private employers here in Northwest Territories, predominantly involved in the mining sector. So we're involved in anything from construction, building ice roads to service a very active diamond mining. We do all of the logistics support for the active mines in NWT and then up into Nunavut. And we also have developed the second largest camp catering, Indigenous-owned camp catering company, so providing the camp catering cleaning services for those mines. We've been branching out recently into more of the reclamation mediation side, and now doing care and maintenance for several sites and developing a full suite of reclamation mediation services for those mines as they come to end of life. So we're very, very active in that mining space. And I think one of the really cool things about it is how much trust there is between the First Nation and industry in terms of what we're involved in terms of the supply chain. If we fail, they fail, and vice versa. So it's very much symbiotic relationship where we're working hand in hand in ensuring a good, solid oversight of business and ensuring the success for both groups.
Great, thank you very much. So a similar question, Hans, as well. And could you tell our audience about some of the work that's being done at the Greenland School of Minerals and Petroleum, specifically sort of the curriculum that your students undergo when they enroll in the school?
Well, we started the school in 2008. The first years was, very, very slow. We didn't have any buildings, we didn't have any equipment, and so we started from scratch. In 2010, we got our own building, and we got a budget from government to buy machinery. So I actually take that as a point of, starting the school for real. In 2012, we started up 2 apprenticeship programs. We have a 4-year apprenticeship program for contracting and a 4-year program for mining. The students have to be here at the school for 2 years before they go to apprenticeship with the companies. And then they come back to the final tests, and then they get the certificate to be skilled. Besides that, we do a lot of specialized courses for the industry, both contracting and mining. We do heavy machinery operator, it's by Norwegian certificates. We do drill rig operator, rigging and lifting, diamond core drilling, crushing, screening, Arctic first aid specialized for the industry, GPS systems for heavy machinery, blasting courses. And so it's quite a range of specialized courses that we actually do here at the school. We're trying to keep up with all the new technology. Biggest problem is that well, we are a governmental school. So I have to use a lot of effort trying to get external funding for a lot of things because the Greenland government don't have, a lot of money. So, and I'm competing with other schools in Greenland. So always a question, how can I finance it? But right now we are going into it's a drone-based blast planner system. We are going into vibration measurements because in Greenland you blast a lot within city limits. So the restrictions for documentation that you do not damage anything towards blasting. We are right now going into this Vulcan software designing program. And we got some new simulators that we are implementing on our heavy equipment program.
Right. And one thing I found interesting about your school is that the students there actually learn on machines rather than strictly coursework, as you've seen as is the case in some other mining schools. Could you talk a little bit about the machines that the students actually learn directly on, and as well as the internship component that gets them that on the ground experience?
For the surface mining, we do have the excavator, the backhoe, the front wheel loader, the grader, the dozer, and what's the last one? Oh yeah, the dumper. So actually 6 machines that have possibilities to get a certificate on. It's very towards safety training, that they learn how to operate safely. And then they have to go to the companies to get more, experience with operating the machines. So we've been doing that since 2012, and we are under audit from the Norwegian authorities. So they come here each year and look everything after. So it's kind of we call that a quality stamp on the school that actually we can hold this kind of training with a Norwegian certificate. It is accepted in other countries.
Okay, great. Thank you. So as a follow-up question to that, how important would you say mining is to the economy of Greenland as a whole? And also, what do you see as the future of mining in Greenland?
For the mining industry, so far we have been very much concentrated on open pit mining, but we are going into more and more underground operations in Greenland. Currently, right now, we have 2 operating mines in Greenland. We have Hudson Resources, that is anthracite, it's open pit. And we got Greenland Ruby, also an open pit Dundas. The government just gave a permit to Dundas Titanium, also open pit. And we got Tenbreeze in southern part of Greenland, that is rare earth elements, and it's also gonna be an open pit operation. So we concentrated very much on, training people towards open pit mining. But things are changing. We got, it had been operating back in time. It was called Nunavut Gold Mine, but now there's a new company that it was closed down, but they will reopen it and start mining again, and that is going to be a underground operation. Then we got a huge project in far up north. It's Ironbark. They call it Tonfjord. It's going to be a huge zinc operation. It's going to be open pit, but also underground. And I think it's very comparable to like Red Dog in Alaska. That will be the scale of that project. So it's going to be quite big. And then we hear about the global prices on iron ore. We have had a project that was stopped, the ISUA project, iron ore, very near Nuuk. And we can see well, I talked to the guys who were involved in that project, and they calculated that they needed to have, I think it was $48 per ton for, break even. But now the prices are up to 200 and I think 30 per ton. So the people who are holding that license, might consider going into action, and that's also going to be a big scale project. So things are moving forward in Greenland. So far, I think we've been lucky that we have, smaller mining projects running in Greenland, because then we can keep up. It's going to be a huge challenge for the school if we're going to have, a big scale mining projects. Also for, the workforce of Greenland are relatively small, and we can't force people to go into mining. They all have to volunteer for this kind of jobs. Most of it will be on remote sites, so it takes another kind of living.
Well, perhaps we could just bring Paul into the discussion now and see whether he's heard anything from Hans thus far that he thinks Canada should be doing as well, especially in the realm of education, perhaps at Aurora College.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So I think we are doing similar things around training and development. We've got something called the Mine Training Society that is directly funding training opportunities, particularly for local Northern Indigenous groups to actively participate in the mining sector. So even for a group like ours, we're very active in getting people on equipment, getting the skills so they can actively participate, right? With the goal that there's a job at the end of it, right? We don't want to train and skill people without having meaningful employment at the end. I mean, that's pretty soul crushing to put your time and energy in. And, we were all young university students once, and that can be very challenging. I think where we would like to see more of it is advancing some of those more technical type skills. So it's great to, get the equipment operations and the drill blast, et cetera, very well versed at that. But what we're trying to put more time and energy into is into those more technical. So mine engineering, how do you get more of the technologist type skill sets, project management, the ability to oversee general leadership. So particularly once you've moved past an exploration type project into a full scale operation. And even, going back to that reclamation mediation piece, we've estimated that, and Northwest Territories alone is about 3 billion of reclamation mediation over the next 10, 20 years. Pan-territorially, if you look at the 3 territories of Yukon, Northwest Territories, and Nunavut, we're looking at 6 to 8 billion. And so there's a whole economy emerging and developing just around that piece, and making sure that we've got the advanced skills, and again, leadership skills to actively participate in that. And I think lastly, and this is one that sort of, mentioned Red Dog Mine in Alaska. So going back to a bit of my former history working in the state, I love the fact that NANA Corporation, which is an Indigenous corporation operating in the state, they're the second largest. They own 35% of Red Dog Mine. And so I think there's a really big emphasis about, transferring those technical skills and even those leadership skills into the business skills. And how do we have jurisdictions like Greenland, like Northern Canada, et cetera, where our local Indigenous Aboriginal population, or even at that community level, where they're building businesses that can service that resource sector and that economy, right? And that starts to create the circular economy, and you start to increase the amount of value that you're keeping at a local level.
Right. And I'm kind of interested to hear your thoughts as well on what the role of mining will be in the economy of Northern Canada in the years to come. Do you think it will continue to play as prominent a role as it does now?
I would like to think so. So I'm very personally a large proponent of the natural resource sector, in this case mining and sort of mineral development. I think the whole concept of environment social governance, or ESG, that has become quite popular in global investing circles. When you start combining that with the Indigenous inclusion within the supply chain and active participation, like the Red Dogs, again, around ownership, et cetera, I think that Northern Canada is poised to be, a world-class leader in terms of ethical resource extraction. And therefore, we can provide a product to the world in terms of amazing rocks, as you will. We've got some incredible mineralization of various types and forms. If you look over in Nunavut, we were talking about iron ore. So you've got the Baffin Land project, which is absolutely massive. You've got some incredibly high-grade gold projects, as high as 3 to 4 ounces per ton. We've got elevated costs that come with that, right? In terms of labor, there's obviously logistics challenges and some infrastructure challenges. But the combination of having some incredible resources and I think combining the ESG and a globe that is increasingly looking for ethical mineral supply for the supply chain, I think Northern Canada is going to be well poised for that. And you're seeing active exploration, particularly around the gold projects. Yukon is doing really well. Nunavut, NWT, Northwest Territories, right now it's got a very active diamond sector. There's a luxury good, that has some downward pressure. But yeah, I really do. Those 3 territories make up 40% of Canada's landmass, and a lot of it still unexplored. What we do know is that we've got very high grade, very high potential.
And building off that, how do we ensure that sort of the supplementary industries to mining actually come north when we invest in mining in the north? So what I'm thinking, for example, is artificial intelligence industries or automation industries, the sort of research that can supplement the mining industry. How do we bring those industries north when we are investing in mining in northern communities?
Those are naturally occurring. That's where the north has to be prepared, right? So right now we've got the luxury of generating very good employment, where good solid compensation, benefits, et cetera, for those that are employed within the mining sector. But as we've seen from forestry, as we've seen from oil and gas or the energy sector, an increasing level of automation, right? We were talking earlier about underground. Well, look at the automation that's starting to take place and autonomy for equipment underground or even above ground. And we're seeing projects around the world that are becoming increasingly more automated, right? So that's naturally going to happen. And again, because of some of the risks involved, some of the high cost drivers around employment, operating full-scale camps on the Arctic, et cetera, that technology will naturally become embedded. So if you look at De Beers, new project that they're proposing on the Chitliach site on the Nunavut territory. So an existing De Beers project that we've got right now, Gacho Quay in Northwest Territories, would have approximately 600 people on site, 400 to 600 people. The Chitliach project, albeit slightly smaller in terms of production, estimated production, I believe they're estimating to have 60 to 80. So a substantial reduction of the footprint for people that would be operating on those sites. And therefore, what does that mean for employment opportunities, et cetera? Again, we've got to be in a position where we can increase the technical skills that we've got, increase the business aptitude so that we can continue to be involved in that supply chain. And at the end of the day, make sure that we're keeping as much as we can at a local level. And again, going back to that concept of the circular economy, we've got to circulate those dollars within the north, right? And I think that can't be understated. If you look at a mature economy, it would be about a 3 times multiple. So for every dollar spent, $3 is generated or circulates within an economy. If you look at the Northern Territories, my understanding it's more like 0.6 to 0.8 at best. So we see a lot of leakage. And as that industry becomes tighter and the employment shrinks, we've got to do a better job of keeping that local.
Hans, do you have any thoughts on what Paul's just said or the question itself?
I think it will develop by itself. If there's a mining project ongoing, well, my thumb rules say that for each guy you have doing mining, you got 2 other guys outside the mining that will be employed towards that industry, right? So it's I don't think it's going to be a problem getting, supporting companies to the mining industry developing in Greenland. I think the biggest problem we have in Greenland is that I think our total workforce is about 35,000 people. That kind of, point out where we are in Greenland. And so the Greenlandic miners will always be part of an international workforce. I don't think we ever will see a totally 100% Greenlandic operating mine. I know for now we're talking about Red Dog. I think that due to the IBA agreement they made over there, the aim was that 80% of all employees at Red Dog should be, local. They have never been above 65%, I think. I went there 2 years ago and got updated on the numbers, So I was quite interested in, you can make your aim for how much local labor you will hire for operating this mine. But again, you have to be realistic, what is possible. And I think we should be quite lucky in Greenland if we can cover 50% of the needed labor for operating mines.
More like I have a follow-up question for you, for Hans, and then I will ask Paul later. Like, how do we make sure the indigenous community concerns are at the forefront when it comes to the new mining projects?
Set up in Greenland is that we have this the Mineral Act from government that companies have to follow. There will be public meetings and a lot of survey for the project. And then a key issue is the IBA agreement. That is a agreement between the local municipality, the government, and the company. So right now we have what are we now, 4 municipalities in Greenland. So local government will be part of that IBA negotiation. And there you will find the numbers, what are the demands going to be for the company. We're talking about, what is the aim for local employment? What are they going to spend on social activities locally? They have to make a education fund that we can apply to, that sort of thing. So it's kind of a key issue in Greenland. That is the IBA, and the local are, it is the municipality that have 1/3 of that negotiation.
Same question for Paul.
Yeah, I think before I hit that question, I want to we sort of talked about Red Dog at 65% employment. I'm not privy to what that impact benefit agreements are the states, but I think setting those high bars means you're always striving to achieve, right? And I don't think that's a bad thing, right? So I don't think we've said 80% and we're hitting 65. Is that a failure? No, that's an opportunity, right? So I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. One stat that I like to always talk about for Northwest Territories. If you take Det'on Cho, the company that I represent, and Chancho Investment Corporation, which is a neighboring Indigenous group that we work with quite closely at times. If you take our local employment, we're the largest private employer of local people in the territory. And we employ as many people as the 3 local people as the 3 mines combined. And a lot of those people are generated because of an active mining sector. So I think that is an incredible success story, that you've got Indigenous groups that are key drivers of the economy, just like in Alaska. Now, obviously at a smaller scale, less population, but you are seeing very active participation by Indigenous groups in these economies, largely driven by the resource sector, right? So, and that's success. Now, sort of going back to your question about, how do we ensure that voice, Indigenous, and sort of ensuring the oversight from a resource extraction standpoint by Indigenous groups? We're very fortunate in Canada and particularly in the northern regions that we've got a very robust oversight through various boards that ensure that those projects are at the highest level of environmental scrutiny. And there's active participation by those Indigenous groups as those projects work through a permitting process. And you've seen, not just in NWT, but across the 3 territories where projects have either been made by Indigenous groups in terms of their endorsement, or in cases, politely pauses put on them because of concerns brought forward by those Indigenous communities. So I think you see a very active process where it works. And I think it obviously in the best interest of industry to ensure that they're building those positive relationships with those Indigenous communities, And as they work through the permitting process, seeing success in getting those projects to the forefront.
I'm very curious to hear your thoughts on situations where there are disagreements within a particular Indigenous community and how that can be resolved regarding a resource extraction project. And what I'm specifically thinking about is the case we saw, the Wet'suwet'en, the blockade there regarding the Coastal GasLink pipeline. And some members of that community were very much in favor of the project, and some members of that community were very much opposed to it. And that obviously led to impasse. So I'm wondering how situations like that can be navigated, where there isn't that sort of agreement within an Indigenous community.
Yeah, so I mean, it's getting a little bit outside of my sort of not understanding, but operating environment, I guess. You start getting into talking about at the community level between hereditary chiefs, elected chiefs, and elected members, from a government body standpoint. And that can be really challenging, right? And especially when you start talking about things like pipelines that are, crossing, obviously, very much multi-jurisdictional, et cetera, right? Those projects can be a little bit thorny at the best of times, right? Where's the opportunity? How do we cross that? Again, this is just personal views. I think as a nation, as Canada, we need to put more time and energy into building capacity. And we're seeing more of that. So if you look at Future Skills Center Canada, that has a northern center that they're developing dedicated to some of that. You're seeing from the federal government standpoint where there's $1 billion for infrastructure. Alberta has got their $1 billion Indigenous Opportunities Fund. So you're seeing opportunities to give Indigenous groups access to really be involved in these projects. But we can't lose sight of building capacity at that community level. Again, going back to the concept, how do we build good, meaningful Indigenous businesses around the concept of economic reconciliation, where they can actively participate and build their own economies, right? And all of a sudden now you've got not only employment opportunities, but real full-blown partnerships where Indigenous groups and communities can see the meaningful upside of participating and having a voice at the table, where now they can talk about how that project proceeds, right? And you're seeing Indigenous groups now having representation on boards. You're seeing greater diversity from that governance standpoint, et cetera. That's only going to enhance the future of some of those projects, right? So I think we're really a little bit at that transitional period. And I think it's really important to understand that, when you look at it from a national perspective across the country, and I'm sure Greenland is no different and other jurisdictions around the world, various communities and groups are developing at different paces, right? And you can't paint all Indigenous groups with one brush. Some are long in their journey in terms of economic development and creating this. Others are just starting that journey. And it takes time to really develop that.
Well, in Greenland, it's a good business for the mining company to hire local workforce as if they are qualified. Because it's very expensive for getting people from other countries, fly in, fly out operation. I've been to Nunavut Mining Symposium a couple of times. And the first time I was quite confused. Who is taking the decisions? In Nunavut, they have, their democratic elected local government. But besides that, you have large Inuit organizations that actually have, a lot of legal rights. As in Canada, you gave a lot of crown land back to some of the people, and I was kind of confused. I know that this Inuit organization have a land area the size of Germany within Nunavut, and they make the calls there. And then you got your local government, and then you got your federal government. I was told that if your feet are in water, then you are on federal terms. If you're on land, you are either within the government of Nunavut or within this Inuit organization's area. So that was kind of very, very different things for us to experience, because in Greenland we are considered, we have one government and we are one people. And I think that might be one of the reasons that a lot of Canadian companies are actually quite interested in Greenland, because it's easier to maneuver around those. You don't have to negotiate with a lot of groups in order to get your project going. So I was quite surprised, I really got my eyes open for, how big a difference it is between Canada and Greenland.
Yeah, and I think it's a fair comment. When you look at the three territories, Indigenous absolutely have a very strong voice, and from a population standpoint, it should. Yukon at 25% Indigenous, Northwest Territories at approximately 52%, and Nunavut, where you had your experiences, I think they're at about 85%, right? And so therefore, when you start looking at self-governing relationships and government-to-government relationships, yes, it's not that you deal with one government for sure. There are going to be sort of multi-levels, and that's where they work on helping companies navigate that from a regulatory standpoint, for sure.
So I think I'll change gears a little bit, not entirely, because this relates quite a lot to what you said earlier about ESGs. But what we've seen a lot recently in extractive sectors has been a focus on how we can enjoy the economic benefits of it, while also keeping in mind the sustainability part of it. So I'll open this up to Hans first, and of course bring Paul in afterwards. But how do we ensure that mining projects, and especially the mines themselves, are environmentally sustainable? And do you think enough is being done to address the environmental and sustainability aspect of that?
Yeah, it's a huge question, and it involves our mineral resource authorities and our environmental authorities. All the companies have to get approval from government departments that they can do it this way. I do see a lot of effort from the companies to cut down the emission of things. For instance, I know that the Tenbreeze project, that the rare earth elements in the southern part of Greenland, have just made an agreement with the national energy company that all energy for that project will be by a hydropower plant. So the CO2 emission will be, zero for that problem, as long as they can, get access to a hydropower plant. So that's going to help, especially because rare earth elements are, normally a very big energy consumer operation. Then I know of Hudson Resources are doing some experimental. It's anthracite, and they have their ore is up the mountain, and they are investigating when they're going downhill, fully loaded with the big dump trucks, is to collect the energy from the brakes all the way down. So you will have that energy for going uphill with an empty load. It could be a good reason that will save a lot of energy, and they are doing experiments about. They have this. It is in the fjord, and they have this big, what do you call that? It's just floating where they land things. If they could get kind of a fans on it, because you got the tide going in and out the floor, so they might be able to collect a lot of energy from the tide. So I think all in all, the companies are going more and more into green solutions, and also because some of it are, it's a good business.
For sure. So I think, sustainability's obviously got different tracks as it relates to the resource sector. If you look at Yukon, where they're building out their hydroelectric grid, their projects coming on stream, they are constrained. So they're really hitting that upper limit. If they bring on another mining project without doing a substantial upgrade, they're going to be challenged to provide a power source, right? In NWT and Nunavut, unfortunately, because of limited infrastructure, a lot of those projects right now are all going to be producing through diesel cogeneration, right? So if you look at the diamond mines in Northwest Territories, all of that produced through diesel, through the use of diesel for power gen. Now, that being said, we're actively looking at ways to bring on green energy sources to power these projects for future generations. But that's going to take a substantial amount of time and capital to do so, right? And that's where we're working with the federal government in terms of quote unquote nation building projects, where we can bring these on in the best interest of the country. whether it be road access, internet, or power. That's something that we need to tackle in the north. But outside of that, I mean, there's also incredible opportunities where if you look at from an environmental bond standpoint, ensuring that the money is there to clean up those sites and they're not left to the state. We've certainly had some historical issues around that. So when we look at some of our legacy projects like Giant Mine in Northwest Territories, Faro in Yukon, those are $1 billion plus cleanups that are left to the federal government. We now have regimes in place that won't happen again in the future. You're also seeing very active progressive reclamation that takes place on our active mines today. So as opposed to going in and high grading and taking as much out as you can, we're also progressively doing cleanup as we mine. So Diavik through Rio Tinto is a good example of that, right? So by the time that mine gets to end of life, I think that's forecast in the next 4 years or so, there's already going to be a substantial amount of cleanup that's being conducted. So, I mean, perfect? No. But I think some very progressive things have taken place in Northern Canada already that we can continue to improve on. Probably the biggest being developing infrastructure for energy sources.
Great. Thank you, Paul. I was thinking, now when you say about where you have to build things up after you are being done with it, and has to be environmentally sustainable. You wrote in an article for Up Here that, quote, brand counts when it comes to attracting resource development. We should build ours up. We are world leaders in sustainable development after all. That should be on top of every investor's mind when they think of North. How do we build that brand?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I did that article over this past winter. A lot of that driven through, again, the Indigenous inclusion piece, which I think is a critical element, something that makes us stand out on the world stage. I've been very fortunate to give some talks recently, Mongolia, South Africa, et cetera. And, whenever I sort of give those talks and talking about the practices that we have today, people are blown away by our Indigenous inclusion. And that really struck to me that we're not doing a good enough job, quite frankly. We talk about the incredible resources we have, whether they be, just from a natural resource standpoint, forestry. If you look at southern parts of the three territories, if you talk about oil and gas, we've got some incredible proven and unproven resources. And then the mining side, obviously, from a mineral standpoint. So we talk about that at length. And if you go to the various mining symposiums, PDAC in Toronto, I think that's the world's largest, everybody's grandstanding and talking about, how rich these resources are. But what we're not doing enough time is talking about how we do it. We're not talking enough about that whole ESG component and how really we've got some world-class resource extraction that is from an ethical standpoint, from an oversight standpoint, and from that Indigenous inclusion piece. And I think that's what I was talking about in sort of creating that brand component. Tell the story, right? So my group, Det'on Cho, through Yellowknives Dene First Nations, just announced last year that we're the miners of a rare earth project, the Cheetah Project. Well, as far as we know, we're the first in Canada to be miners on our own land. Let's talk about that story. What does that look like, right? Let's be that trendsetter nationally and internationally.
Thank you. And Hans, I will be very interested to hear what you think Greenland's brand is and how it can be built.
I think from the politician side, there is big focus on doing this sustainably. There's a big focus on the environmental side of mining projects, and I think that the companies are getting it. It's part of their what do you call that, social license to operate. Is that you have some excellent plans for how to do this the best way, that you have a minimum of pollution, or because I know that the people of Greenland are very much into that we live of the land. We need our clean water for the fish and seals and our reindeer areas and all that. So I think that as long as our politicians have the right focus on this is a must for operating in Greenland, I think it won't be a problem. I think that the issue is that we have to maybe convince people more that we need the mining. You know, if you can't grow it, you have to mine it. And we can't keep on saying, well, they can do that in Russia or, you know, somewhere else. They can have the pollution there. No, we have to work on our own projects, also because we need the jobs, we need the economy behind the mining industry in Greenland, but we have to do it sustainably.
I really want to touch on that point very quickly, but I think that's a really, really valid point. And, you know, not trying to get too political, but if we're going to be touting in developed countries, Greenland, Canada, elsewhere, around green technologies, then we also need to be investing in the supply chain. We can't simply say, you know, we're going to have a renewable economy and a green economy, and we're hearing lots of talk about that in sort of the developed countries. But that also means that we have to own and control the supply chain. And we simply can't take that from other jurisdictions where they don't have the same oversight. I think that is a really, really valid point, and I agree 100%.
I can tell you that we have a what you call that, a powder buggy, you know, the car we're using for transporting explosives through the town. And the sticker says, this car and road are brought to you by the mining industry. Just to, you know, make people aware of where do things come from. How many rare earth elements are actually in your cell phone, and then they start to getting it. You know, we need to have access to minerals, and the country need to have this industry in Greenland. We have to continue working on people's awareness. What are all the problems and the issue talking about the mining industry?
As a Greenlander myself, let's say if I am against mining and I live in, for example, in Assam, what would you tell me to get me more on board with the mining?
Okay, so you are testing my sales talent. No, I think it will be about bringing things to attention that what are different minerals being used for. I could take, for example, your car. If you have a car, I can pinpoint out, you know, this is zinc, this is iron, and you got your GPS in your car. How many rare earth elements are in that? And, you know, the whole technology behind you having a car. And I think that it will be my job to make you more aware of where do things come from. And I think it is simply a matter of knowledge. That people have to accept that everything they take, you know, have some minerals in it. As I say, you know, if you can't grow it, you have to mine it. So that will be my biggest effort to convince you for being pro-mining.
Okay, thank you. And for Paul, a similar question. Now I'm not from Canada, but I am Greenlandic. But what would you say to me if I lived in Canada, but if I was against mining and part of the Indigenous people in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're going to have increasingly more visibility around the supply chain. So if you look at blockchain technologies, et cetera, you know, you're seeing companies now that like Apple, et cetera, they're starting to invest and say, hey, listen, you know, when we look at our technical, our devices, what is our supply chain, right? We've seen that from the manufacturing side with Nike, et cetera, that have had some issues around their supply chain, right? And at the end of the day, these companies are really marketers. They're not building products, but they have to tell a story. Going back to, you know, talking about what is the brand, right? So that supply chain is becoming increasingly more important in telling that story for these global brand names. So as we start having more visibility around what that supply chain is, you know, that will become to the forefront where we can tell the story better, and we can be, I think it opens up people's eyes a bit more about where these, where the supply comes from. So what do we need to do on our side when I look in Canada? Again, going back to that article, telling our brand, we need to be able to have those metrics and talk about some of those good things as well, right? Until we're able to source the minerals or resources that we require from somewhere else. I mean, we're looking at different technologies, even exploring from space, et cetera. And who knows, maybe in our lifetime, we're able to do that. For the time being, you know, we have to get it from Earth. We need it for our quote unquote green economy. So therefore, how do we do it in the most ethical way possible? How do we tell that story better? And then how do we paint the picture from a supply chain side about sort of those good things, right? So again, going back to, I love telling the story around the Indigenous inclusion about our resource sector, because I think that's incredibly powerful, right? So we're able to not only participate and create meaningful employment, we get to have Indigenous businesses that are controlled and managed by our Indigenous groups that are actively participating in that. So we're creating our own employment. That's a story that we need to do a better job telling, right? How do we reduce, the footprint? How do we tell that ESG component? How are we doing that progressive reclamation mediation?
I'm conscious of the time here, so I just want to ask the two of you one final question to sort of wrap things up, and that's whether you see any opportunities for greater collaboration between mining industries in Canada and Greenland.
Well, I, for one, would love to come over to Greenland, so I'll start there. That I think it all comes from learning, et cetera, and sharing. I heard some great things today that I'm certainly going to do some thinking about. I really think it comes down to, for those northern jurisdictions, we do have unique opportunities and challenges as it relates, whether that be Northern Canada, Greenland, Iceland, et cetera, Russia. So the more that we can sort of sit down and talk and learn from each other, I think it really starts there, right? I did know that Greenland has a lot of interest from Canadian mining companies. So I think you're already seeing Canada investing in Greenland. Because it is an attractive area to invest in. So I think that's sort of happening a bit organically, but I think we can definitely put more effort and energy into understanding each of these jurisdictions and how do we learn from each other in terms of those best practices.
Well, Paul, you'll be welcome here anytime. I'd love to show you our operation.
All right, I'm packing my bags. As soon as COVID's over, I'm coming over.
Yeah. No, I see a huge potential for a much larger collaboration between similar organizations towards the Arctic, and I've been working with the thought for some years now. What we need to develop is kind of a Arctic best practice for mining. And it's very hard. I talk to people in Alaska and in Russia and in Canada, all that, everything. It's a great idea. We should do it. But there's a lot of obstacles. And I think that it could be on the agenda of the Arctic Council that you develop a collaboration for similar organizations that operate within the Arctic Circle. So they have a kind of a formal collaboration. And from our area, it will be to work with best practice within the Arctic. And there you can put in, sustainability and safety training and all that, because it is special to operate within the Arctic Circle. So of course, the damn Corona have stopped everything. It's okay to have a Zoom meeting, but you need all those. If you are living within the Arctic, you know that personal relations are the key to everything up here. I haven't been traveling since we had the outbreak of COVID. I've been, grounded, and I can feel it that everything slowly, you get less and less contact with people that actually you should interact with. So I'm looking forward to. Hopefully next year to go to PDAC and I'll go to Alaska. I'll go a lot of we need to talk more together, but I think that we need to get into if we want to proceed with a job like that, we need to go to the Arctic Council and say we have a suggestion that we need to collaborate more within the Arctic Circle, also for keeping the jobs within the Arctic Circle for local peoples. A lot of people that think it's great. Well, I'm living in Florida. I'll take 1 or 2 trips to Red Dog. Not a problem. No, we'll try to keep the jobs and the expertise within the Arctic Circle for the institutions, for the people, for everybody.
That's great. I like that idea, but absolutely. I think that makes a lot of sense.
I think it makes a lot of sense too. And to wrap up, before we say goodbye, I just wanted to ask whether there was anything that we hadn't mentioned that you wanted to get off your chest before this interview is over.
Oh, there's always lots, but the one thing I always like to conclude, especially on the Canadian side, obviously I'm personally very invested in the Indigenous business space. It's my career. I've been into it for almost a decade. I really, truly, personally feel that all Canadians benefit when we have healthy Indigenous business and inclusion, whether that be within the resource sector and beyond. So it's in our best interest as Canada, as a nation, that we continue to build the capacity and to ensure that our Indigenous groups are included within our economy, whether it be economic reconciliation or just simply by the fact that that active participation helps build the economy. But all of us as Canadians, should be investing and ensuring the future of Indigenous business.
Thank you both very much for your time today. This was a really interesting discussion, and I appreciate hearing from both of you.
It really was, and have a great day.
Yeah, thank you very much for the invite. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
Hope to see you eventually sometime again.